Welcome to the Father on Purpose podcast, featuring author and ministry leader Kent Evans and business executive and military veteran Lawson Brown. This is a show for you, Dad. You want to be a godly and intentional father. Unfortunately, you've turned to these two knuckleheads for help. Let us know how that works out for you. Before we begin, remember this: you are not a father on accident. So go be a father on purpose. Please welcome your hosts, Kent and Lawson.
You know, Lawson, if we were doing this show like 35 years ago, well, for starters, I'd only be like 17 and it would not be a good show. Secondly, if we were doing it a long time ago, we'd have like a mailbox, like an actual mailbox where real mail comes in, and we would take letters out of it and we'd read letters from guys who listen to the show. But in the age of digital, we can do that through the power of the interwebs. And so what we have is we're going to start today's show with a couple of comments as if they were from the mailbag, but they're actually from like the email form inputs that guys gave us. And the show today is going to be about connecting with our kids. So if you're a dad out there listening and you struggle to connect with your kids, today's show is for you. Lawson, how are you, man?
Hey, bud, good. I wondered where you were going with that. I was like, well, first of all, if it was 35 years ago, we'd be on the actual, probably like AM radio or something. And I would never have known how to get a hold of someone on the radio.
We'd have to do like weather and traffic in between. Like, hey, there's a jackknife out on the 42 and he's coming around. We like we're in the helicopter. Yeah. Okay. Here's what one of our survey filler outers sent to us. I'm going to call him Zane. That's not his actual name. He didn't give us his name, and it's anonymous, but it was a great comment. And by the way, if you're out there, Mr. Anonymous, and you don't like being called Zane, next time put your dumb name in the form. I mean, you don't even got to tell us your street address. Just give me a first name. Okay,
why are you being so...
I don't know, man. I'm
calling it a dumb name? Come on, bro.
No offense to all the Zanes out there. Except, he was always the guy who's called last in class. All right. A, B, C. And then they finally go Zane and he's like, here, Anonymous said this. He said, my kids are now young adults, and I feel my greatest challenge at this point in my journey is staying connected with them. As they go off and explore what their lives will become, I want to make sure we continue to stay connected so I can continue to help guide them. Keeping the healthy balance between letting them explore their own path and learning the lessons along the way and having them come to me for friendship, guidance, and love is my biggest challenge now. I love the way he said that. What did Jeff say, Lawson?
Yeah, well, I didn't catch that last sentence until just now. Let's come back to that. Jeff says, staying connected with our kids as they move into their late teen years. So that's the challenge. It's hard to maintain the close relationships of childhood as they're moving into adulthood. Yeah, say that again. Often, they want to navigate some things on their own. As parents, we're programmed to tell them what to do or how to fix it. As they get older, our advice is more and more perceived as being controlling rather than being received as wise counsel. This is a growth issue for both parent and child, but it's still a struggle.
Ooh, man, totally that's agree. Great. Yeah, it's great. And I have one son who's married and out of the house. I have one in college. And you have two daughters who are essentially not out of the house entirely, but old enough.
Pretty independent.
Yep, independent. And I can't wait to dive into this. Before I do, I always like to kind of read between the lines when I'm either I could be across the table from someone having coffee, and I'm trying to listen. As one of my communication coaches always told me, try to be listening both to what they're saying and what they're not saying, right? And then when you read it in print, like we do with emails that come in, I like to read between the lines. And there's something between the lines on both Zane's comment and Jeff's comment. And here is what I think is between the lines that needs to be stated out loud. And for a lot of dads, they could just listen to this next thing and then turn off the podcast because it's going to be golden. It's going to be so good. It's going to be so good. Between the lines of Zane's comment and Jeff's comment is a concept that is, they want the relationship with their children to basically stay the same forever. Now, I know neither of them would have said that out loud, but part of what's in this is I want to be able to still guide them. I want to be able to still be in their life. One part of it even said, tell them what to do or how to fix it. And the other one said advice. And so there's a lot of terminology in here that would suggest I want to stay in the quote unquote parent-child relationship with my kids, even when they move out of my house. And here's the beautiful part of that. No, you don't. Like, no, you don't. The whole objective of parenting is to be able to raise our children up in the fear and admonition of the Lord and then send them out on mission. That doesn't mean we get disconnected like some umbilical cord has been cut a whole second time.
Okay. Yep.
But what it means is I'm going to embrace the new kind of relationship with my children rather than try to hold on to the old one. Mm-hmm. So like as an example, my wife and I were just talking the other night. We have, of course, this grown son who's married. Great guy. He and his wife have started their life down in Nashville. And I love where they're headed. Do I wish I were connected with them more often? Of course. I don't like them living 3 hours away. I don't like only getting to talk to them by phone or by FaceTime or Zoom. However, I'm excited that they're down there like slugging it out in the real world. And I think the challenge for me is I still have a 7-year-old at home who will ask me to snuggle with him at bedtime.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
And so sometimes I might look at that as if, whoa, this relationship is broken and distant and disconnected because he lives 3 hours away and only calls me once a week. Or because I see the comparison. I see
That's what I was about to say. You because your kids range in age so far, you know, that you can see one end of the spectrum from the other.
Yeah. And you might have a different reaction, but I just noticed that. And I wanted to remind all of our, the dad who's listening to this, who has the same situation where either he's got kids who've already moved out or he's got adult children, or he can see that coming real soon. He's got a senior in high school or something like that. I want to encourage us to embrace the next phase of quote unquote parenting. And it looks a lot more like friendship than it does parenting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're more in it together versus you, the dad, being the director. I just listening and then reading again. So the purpose behind why someone as a dad would want to guide, direct, be a part of their lives, that's obvious. You know, a lot of men share that who have kids. They want to be there for them as much and as best as they can. That underlying reason is what we're trying to help address today is that connection in whatever form it is, depending on their age and where they are and what they're dealing with in their lives and what you're dealing with in your life, how your family dynamic works. But let's pause here and maybe start from the beginning in defining what connection means. What does connecting with our kids mean, and how does the elements of having a connection support that healthy fatherhood?
Yeah, you put some notes in our show notes. What are some things I'd like for you to maybe start there, Lawson? What are some things that you see as bits of a healthy, good, connected relationship?
Yeah, I asked myself, what does it mean to me? And so I just kind of started like off the top of my head, I put relationship. I put bond, trust. These are not only what does connection mean, but what are some elements that are healthy to support it. And I think trust is huge. And then transparency and authenticity in our relationship with them and in our connection. And, you know, what I love of the way God's timing works is this topic for us today was one that I had in the back of my mind. And then, as I told you before, I've been in Las Vegas for almost a week at our annual industry conference. A lot of guys from our team, a lot of tons and tons and tons of customers. And man, while there, I had some interesting conversations about fatherhood. About
really,
we're sitting around having a coffee or something like that. We met one guy right before dinner, and it was just one of those times where it was a kind of a air quote quiet moment. There is no quiet out there in that crazy city. Gosh, why they picked Las Vegas? Ugh. But yeah, it was just he and I, and we were just kind of sitting there catching up, and and he is struggling with something with his teenage daughter. And I could relate, having had daughters.
Yeah.
His is different than something that we went through, but I'll tell you the gist of the story was his young teenage daughter got to go on a trip with a mother and like 4 or 5. That mother also had daughters, and then they all brought along, 3 or 4 of their girlfriends. And it started to feel, so this guy's daughter, my friend's daughter, it's not unusual for him to get a phone call from her in a meeting. Like, I think they talk daily, which I love. I think it's super cute. That's
cool.
And I asked about her, and he goes, yeah, he kind of gave me one of those like, I think she's doing pretty good. So I just kind of probed and listened, and it was because she had just gotten home from that trip. And, and long story short, in the middle of that trip, he almost left home and drove probably 6 hours to go get her out of that environment that she was in on that trip with those other girls. And so we kind of kept talking and came to kind of realize, I think hopefully to his encouragement, was that the reason he knew about it was because he has a good connection with his daughter.
Right.
Otherwise, this or that could have happened, and either he found out about it after the fact too late, or never. So the more we talked, we kind of got into as I left that conversation, I was thinking about it more. And then on the plane ride home, I was checking out our notes, and I thought, if you are, when we are in the midst, Dad, when we are in the midst, because it's not an if, it's when this happens, when this sort of thing happens, that is not when you begin to build a connection. You've got to, right? Yeah, you've got to have that relational equity built up as a reserve, so that when these times come, you're able to be there for them. And so I think I want to underscore the importance of having those connections with our kids. And look at ranges. We've got dads with 7-year-old little boys that are doing baseball, T League, and then guys with granddaughters, grandsons.
Yeah.
And so the connection differs, like you said.
And the one advantage you and I have is we have this input from so many different men. We got surveys, we've got emails, we've got online tools where we've seen all kinds of input. And so the beautiful thing we can bring is you and I can be a curator, so to speak, of some good ideas for how to stay connected to your kids, which we'll cover kind of on the show today. It's not so much that you and I have it all figured out, but it's that we're talking to dads like you did, who do have bits and pieces of it figured out. And that's one thing that I think, like, if I step out for a moment of today's topic, and I just, it is rare to find men who are well connected to other men. It's just rare. I was with a guy today. We were shooting some video, and I asked the guy, I said, hey, when's the last time a guy friend of yours sent you something he found to be interesting or helpful or encouraging, just because he thought, I bet so-and-so would like this. And he kind of stared at the ceiling and goes, I don't know. Never. Like a year ago, maybe, I don't know. Like, yeah, he had no reference point. And I just for fun, because you made the point about being connected. Sometimes what we want from our children is something we don't even know how to do. So like you'd be a total fool to have me teach you the sport of curling, right? I don't know the first thing about it other than it's on ice and it looks like they've got a brooms. I don't know nothing. If you were dumb enough to let me teach you about curling, you deserve to be awful, right? Because I don't know. And a lot of us are trying to get our kids to be PhDs at connecting, while we ourselves are like kindergarten level connectors. And so it's not that everybody has to be a social butterfly or, outgoing extrovert, but man, let me ask, there's a dad driving along right now, or he's mowing his grass or he's at his workout. And I want to ask you, Dad, when is the last time someone sent you anything valuable just because? And then a harder question. When's the last time you sent somebody something just because? It's an element. It's not the only thing, but it's an element of connecting. And we don't do it well as men, peer to peer. And so therefore, when we have adult children, guess what? We find a lot of trouble in trying to do this ourselves because we're trying to play a sport we've never really learned. And so the practice ground, I tell my boys all the time, the way you treat your mom is practice for your wife. Mm-hmm. Right? The way you treat your mom is practice for your wife. And so you're going to have to be quick to listen and slow to speak and slow to become angry, as James 1:19 says, with your mom. Why? Because that's going to come in real handy later when you're a husband. Or you're going to have to listen with compassion. You're going to have to listen and not listen to respond. All these principles with your mom. It's great training ground. So dad, if you want your kids to be better connected with you, practice on your own friends. Practice on your own friends. Let me throw a couple ideas, Lawson, at the listener. I want to throw some practical ideas, stories, tips, ideas for how can we be better connected with our children. One of them is we've got to be a source of encouragement, not just correction. And encouragement, not just correction. Like I appreciate what Jeff and what Zane said in their comments about, it's important that we want to be able to speak into their life and give guidance, which is sometimes code for criticism, right? I understand. We want to give advice, okay, which is sometimes, what unsolicited advice is called? Criticism. And so there are times when we really want to speak into, AKA control or influence or guide our children. Could be good for good reasons or for bad. But what we've got to make sure we do that on the back of, especially as they get older, is on the back of plenty of encouragement. And you had a comment.
Yeah, well, here's what happened. I got an email from our head of HR. I'm on a subcommittee for like culture among the company.
Is his name also Zane?
Huh? No.
Is his name also Zane?
No, it's not. No, I'm not reusing
what
asking. We've already gotten. Silly. So anyway, I'm on this committee, and so periodically something will come up. So an email came about a book. It's called The 5 Graces of Leadership by the Korn Ferry CEO. So I haven't read the book. I'm not recommending it at all. But in that email, there was a paragraph kind of describing it. What caught my eye was 5 graces of leadership. Sure. So I was like, where's this coming? Where's this going? But I agreed with part of the paragraph that came with it. This guy, back to your point about reinforcing what our kids do right through encouragement. And I'm not saying, I'm not talking about like some certain thing, some specific extracurricular. I'm talking about doing the right thing. Yeah. More than hitting the ball well. But to improve our connection, what this guy, the CEO of Korn Ferry wrote, he says, it's one of the most consistent questions I get these days. How can I connect with my team? He says, start with recognition, really looking at people and seeing the whole person in full context. And then he also quoted our very close friend, Ken Blanchard, who was on our podcast.
I wish that were true. I mean, he was on the podcast. That part is true. Yeah. I wish we were close friends. Boy, I'd love to learn more from that guy.
He probably doesn't remember. He does so much. Ken Blanchard likes to say, it's catching people doing things right. I would say it's catching our kids doing the right things. And then he goes on to say, where there's recognition, there's trust. And it runs in both directions. I thought that was interesting. Man. And it was a reminder of not being a father that is all about correction, and keeping them out of the ditch of life through, watch out for that, don't do this. but encouraging when they do it right. That's way more effective, I think.
Hey, Lawson, have you ever wondered, how are you doing as a dad? Have you ever thought that?
All the time.
We know, we're dads, you and me. We know that is a constant challenge for dads is, how am I doing? So what we built was the Godly Father Quiz. It's a 28 question, totally free online tool. you can go and take the survey and figure out where are you now and where you want to go next. How does that sound, Lawson?
It sounds great. I've done it, and it was very helpful. I love it.
Dad, right now, pull over, put down your Coca-Cola, get off of the internet. No, wait a minute. Go back to the internet. Go to manhoodjourney.org/quiz, Q-U-I-Z, manhoodjourney.org/quiz, and take the free, totally free Godly Father assessment today so you can know how you're doing as a dad and where you need to grow and improve. We might have a dad listening to this show who's a bit older, right? So he has adult children, and one of his adult children sent a $10,000 check to Manhood Journey to support our mission. That's catching them doing something right.
Yeah, something like that.
Right?
That's a good,
like if one of your kids wants to donate to Manhood Journey, encourage them, recognize them. It's so important. Okay. The second thing, I've read through quite literally more than 2,000 long form, probably more like 2,500 long form responses to the question, what is my greatest challenge as a father? Over the last 5 years, I've read through thousands of answers, and I've seen a pattern in some of the answers about the topic of connection and sometimes communication. And that is, my child is interested in things that I'm not interested in, or vice versa. I have interests and passions my kids don't share.
Oh, like finding a connection, but yet you don't have a whole lot in common.
Exactly. And so what I'm always encouraging those dads to consider, and I'll encourage our listener dad to consider this, is while we were yet sinners, Jesus died for the ungodly. So in an effort to bridge the connection gap, Jesus came to earth and lived our life, even though he didn't have to. And so, Dad, if you're waiting around for your kids to all of a sudden become interested in the professional bowling circuit that you like to watch every Sunday night, they're not going to. Okay? Sorry. You watch. No, I'm not going to get on bowlers. I'm just going to say, listen, so many dads, and especially, Lawson, I think, dads of kids who are out of the house, the empty nester dads, they start to have this mental paradigm that, again, if they were to say it out loud, it would say kind of maybe crazy or selfish or not what they really mean, but they think it's their kid's job to reach out to them. And you'll hear this kind of idea, I raised them to do better than that, and now here I am. They'll go a whole month and not even call me.
Interesting. Yeah.
And I think, well, that's interesting. Do you have one of those unique telephones that only receives phone calls?
Right.
Do you? Are you one of those? Wow. So I'm a little tongue in cheek, but here's the thing. I'll give you some specific examples. My oldest son, Alex, is a stud guitar player, really good guitar player, several songs on Spotify, making his way in the world in worship bands and now on albums and stuff. And I don't understand music theory or music at all, like at all. And from the age of like 13 to 18, he was really developing a lot of music chops in our home, in this very basement where I'm recording this podcast. And I would come down and I would say, hey, what are you playing? How does it work? What are those things called? He's like, strings, Dad. They're on a guitar. I'm like, okay, I'm pretty ignorant when it comes to music. But what I did was I sat with him for hours and hours of his teenage years, letting him try to explain music to me, most of which went over my head.
Right.
For the express purpose of creating a bond with him over that topic.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah.
I still don't understand a lot of music. Now, let me flip the example. My second oldest son is in college to be an architect. One of my loves is architecture. I love architecture. I love art. I started as a student of architecture at the University of Kentucky. I wanted to be an architect. So now I've got a son in college who's sending me pictures of the models that he's building and the drawings that he's doing. That's very easy for me to relate to. Music was very hard for me to relate to. Architecture is very easy for me to relate to. So what?
Right.
It's the level of difficulty isn't the point. The point is, can I find common ground? And here's the magic, right? On their terms.
Yeah.
On their turf.
Man, so I didn't have a whole lot in common with my dad as far as like just kind of general interest and the things that I was attracted to do. Unfortunately, it took it took me. He wasn't an issue. He was my biggest fan. Even though it was,
well, your second biggest. I'm your biggest.
Okay, there you go. He was very not interested, for himself in doing what I loved. And it took me until adulthood to realize that it's on me too. I mean, what you just said, dude, did hit home a little bit with me. And I think I lost some time in there, and I lost some connection with a guy that was, a huge fan, always wanting to be wherever I was and doing, watching the thing or whatever. And, man, it makes me sad. It makes me wonder, are there dads who are waiting on their son or their daughter to come to them? Maybe
Right.
they are their own child's biggest fan. And, I now as an older dad myself, gosh, I bet it really hurt his feelings and damaged that connection. I love it when my daughters, like last night at dinner after I'd gotten home from Vegas, me, Audrey, and Olivia went out, and Olivia wanted to know how my week went in Vegas. She has zero interest in the fire sprinkler industry, no interest in hearing about.
She's not a big fire sprinkler girl.
A bunch of grown people talking about that industry, and but you know what she's interested in is me, and
right,
and so when that happens, it really, I'm glad you brought that up, because it really does help us as dads when our kids are interested like that. But here's something that I would throw out there, and that is, do you, Dad, involve your kids in what you're doing? Like, do you make time in your life? Do you have some space that's carved out for quiet time? Do you create those moments where it would feel like maybe your kids, they don't know how to ask you,
Yeah.
And so we can model that. We can involve them in our life and tell them stories of what has happened, in our week. That'll bring them closer. That helps develop a connection, because what was read before is that it goes, it when there's recognition and trust, it runs in both directions.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And what's interesting is I'm hesitant sometimes to use certain stories or examples on our podcast, only because
You mean of your own?
Well, because I might have my actual children who listen to the show, and I may have actual friends who listen to this show. But I do want to say something that I think will help some guys, at the risk of, potentially getting some inbound emails from people. If April, my wife, and I have 100 interactions with friends throughout a given year, we initiated north of 90 of those. And we have often had this conversation about, is that just part of what God's asked us to do, is to be the proactive initiator? Or are we wearing out our welcome? Like, are we literally just initiating too often? Or are we just more interested in them than they are us? Like, we've had all these conversations around the topics. And I think the model, the Jesus model, right, is, for God so loved the world, he sent his only son. And Jesus made the trip. Jesus is the one who closed the gap. He went into the place.
That's rich.
And I just accidentally compared myself to Jesus. I don't mean to do that.
No,
what I mean for the dad, as your kids get older, it may be incumbent upon you to increasingly bridge the gap. And let's not be embittered by that. Let's not be judgmental or angry or don't take the victim posture here. Initiate. Reach out.
Right.
You're probably the one with more time.
Yeah.
You're probably the one with more money. You're probably the one with more social wherewithal. So use those skills to bridge the gaps, rather than sit back and just go, you know what? They never call me. And I think it's important, man, that we take that posture, because, to your point, it was C.S. Lewis who said, I'm going to totally paraphrase what C.S. Lewis said. He said, if you meet someone who's truly humble, you won't notice them talking about themselves very much. You won't notice them talking about that. They won't even be thinking about themselves. What you will conclude, gee, they sure seemed interested in me. Like that's kind of, I'm paraphrasing this whole C.S. Lewis thing. And the bottom line is I'm rarely around people who ask me questions about what I'm up to, right? It's the exception. It's the exception. And I'm not mad about it. I just observe it. And I notice, that's interesting. Is that because they are prideful or because they are ate up with their own life or because they're evil? Probably not. But it's some combination of, we've got to learn from that as dads.
Yeah.
We've got to be the outreach leaders.
Yeah. If this podcast is just good stories, I think we are falling short. And because like we've talked about before, like the practicality of the encouragement, the idea generation that I hope people get from this. You reminded me again. I want to loop around to the story I told you about that guy that I had a coffee with in that quiet moment in Vegas. If to your point, if we dads aren't proactive and like eager and engaged to create that connection with our kids, I'll promise you this, somebody out there is. And when our kids are growing up and even into their young adulthood, dude, the people that they are connecting with matter so much, because who you surround yourself with, the pack that they run in, it's so critical to their development and influence. And there are countless ways that they don't, especially when they're younger, they don't know what they're doing. They think they do. So they can just run off the ranch together real easily. And so what fortunately for my buddy, his daughter, I'm getting choked up. His daughter, in the midst of this peer pressure hell that she found herself in, because it's hard. It is really hard in those moments as a kid to be for sure on what is the right thing to do. It's just, it can feel gray area. If it can feel a little ambiguous, they could feel ganged up on. And I don't know that all that was true in that scenario, but it sure did feel to him like she was being cornered and pressured into some things that in her beautiful little heart, she just felt was wrong enough that she picked the phone up and called her dad. And dude, that is the level of connection that he has established over years and years was because he was proactive and he was engaged in her life. He was the active listener. He asked a lot of questions. It was all about her. He didn't think about himself. And so, Dad, that's our job. Our job is to build that force field of connection around our children so that they can either fend off the negative connections that are coming their way, and they are, and protect them within it so that they feel such a good bond of trust and transparency and authenticity with us that whatever happens, they know that they can come running and share. They'll be received with open arms. And to your point, Jesus made the journey. And so we can't wait around and go, well, that, I don't know. It's just difficult to have a conversation. They don't talk to me. They don't want to open up. Well, Dad, you have to. You absolutely have to. It's on us.
It is. Man, Lawson, let's just land the plane. That's brilliant. Way to go. I think two things. One, to wrap up, and that is, I think we accidentally tripped across the right episode title called That Quiet Moment in Vegas. I think because it will be probably the only podcast on earth with that title, because those don't actually exist. A quiet moment in Vegas. But that's a great way to land the plane. Guys, if you listen to today's show and you found it helpful, share it with somebody. There's a dad out there that that, and incidentally, like we always say, if you didn't find it helpful, why are you still around? Beat it. Go find another podcast. Secondly, share it. And share it with a dad who is walking through a season where he needs better connection with his kids. He told you that. You've observed it. You've seen it. Maybe today's show could be an encouragement to that dad, and maybe you are the guy who needs to send him a link to today's show right now. Pull over. Don't do it while you're driving. Pull over and send your friend a link to the show, because we've got to encourage one another. Thanks for joining us. We can't wait to be back with you again next week. Hey, Dad, thank you for listening to today's show. If you found this episode helpful, remember, you can get all the content and show notes at manhoodjourney.org/podcast. And if you really liked it, please consider doing 3 things. Number 1, share this podcast with someone. You can hit the share button in your app, wherever you listen to podcasts, or just call a person up and tell them to listen in. Number 2, subscribe to this podcast so you get episodes automatically. That helps us as well to help dads find the show. You can do that through your favorite listening app, whatever that is. And finally, review this podcast. Leave us a review, good or bad, wherever you listen. Those reviews also help other dads find the show. You can always learn more about what we're up to at manhoodjourney.org or fatheronpurpose.org. We will see you next week.
You've been dozing off to the Father on Purpose podcast featuring Kent Evans and Lawson Brown. Now, wake up. Head over to fatheronpurpose.org for more tools that can help you be a godly, intentional, and not completely horrible dad. Remember, you are not a father on accident, so go be a father on purpose.